to the first edition of the Badass Entrepreneurs Club. The whole point of this podcast is to bring entrepreneurs' story to light, showcasing to those who are the upcoming generation of entrepreneurs what this journey really is about. It's not all roses, unicorns, and rainbows. There's a lot of ups and downs that happen with this, and we want to show what really does happen, the wins that you can have, but also some of the losses, just so you go into this with a really open mind and open heart as you go on your own journey. We're also going to be highlighting a lot of amazing brands so that you can see these brands that you admire in different industries, how they came to be, and where they're going into the future. So I'm very excited to be starting this podcast with a bunch of my amazing entrepreneurial friends. And unfortunately, my team decided that I should be interviewed for the first episode, which I'm still cringing about. But I have brought on my amazing friend, Anne Genge, who is one of the creators of Alexio, which is an amazing cybersecurity company. So I have the honor of putting her in control of this whole situation, and I'll let you take it away, Anne.
Well, Angela, I'm actually the one that's really honored. You're one of the most impressive and badass women I know. So I'm excited to be a part of this in general, but even more so to be the first interview. Really, I guess my first thing would be to understand and have other people understand what your professional journey, like what got you started. How did we get to here?
Perfect. So as a lot of people know, I wanted to be a dentist since I was 2. So when I actually got to graduate dental school, it was this massive dream come true. And I went forth into the world and was an associate, scared of my own shadow, scared of my own words. And so I got stuck working with kids for quite a long time, 4.5 years actually, because with adults, I was so nervous. I would sweat, I would start stuttering, I would turn red. It was so uncomfortable. And like any great overachiever, you reach a point where you go, you know what, something has to change. And for me, the unfortunate thing that had to change was I needed to step out of my comfort zone and start working with adults. And the practices that I had worked on, they had always given me the kids, so that transition wasn't going to happen with me being an associate. Oftentimes when I make a decision, something has to change, the perfect opportunity presents itself. And it did. I ran into one of my old bosses and he said, you know what, I'm working at this broken down practice. I don't really want to be working there. Do you want to take some hours off my hands? And I said, sure, why not? So when I drove up to this practice, I felt a little bit foolish because I'm sitting in the dark in an area of town I've never been, and I am scared to death. I'd never been to this part of town because it is the scariest part of town. I'm thinking, you know what, someone could like totally take me out here and no one would know the difference. So when he finally drove up beside me, I was really quite relieved, and we went up into the practice. And when he opened the door to the practice, what greeted my eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The carpet that was once beige was blackened from years of dirt and cigarette smoke, and it had never been cleaned. Unfortunately, the whole clinic was in poor repair. The first patient that I laid back in the chair actually grabbed the tubing to the drill to support it because they knew it didn't work properly if they didn't. So not only was the environment in poor repair, unfortunately, so were the patients. Majority of the workplace the previous 3 years looked like a little Pac-Man had gone in and eaten underneath it because it had been placed on a bed of decay.
Oh my gosh.
The funny thing is though, everything I looked around at in the practice made me feel full of hope and sunshine. And I'd never in my life wanted to own a practice. People asked me about that. I was dancing professionally while I was a dentist. And so I was always like, well, the dentistry thing, I can do that for the rest of my life. Dance, I can only do for a small period of time. So dentistry was definitely the love of my life, but I wanted to make sure I achieved my dreams in dance at the same time. So that bug to be an entrepreneur in dentistry just didn't exist until I walked into this situation.
So there was some kind of big moment or, you know, it was probably your first real big kaboom where you realized that, you know, that is sort of the making lemonade from lemons thing, that most people would look at that and just kind of go like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to touch that. But you actually just and like you say, sometimes there's these tsunamis and there's these big dramatic moments where we make that shift. So
Mhm.
so really, what happened next?
Well, I talked to the broker and said, I'd like to buy this practice. I went and talked to the owner who was in the hospital. He was 78, and unfortunately, he was dying from cancer. And anyone who had
Mhm.
approached him about the practice before, he had helped the deal to fall through. So he had been holding on because that was what he knew in his life. That was what his identity was. And finally, when he was near his deathbed, then he was ready to relinquish it. And he had actually said, excuse my language, but I will never sell this to a fucking woman. And then
Oh,
little old me walks in,
oh
all cute
wow.
and young at 28, 50 years his junior,
Yeah.
and he finally said yes. So that started the next year of my life, which was just hunkering down and being so inspired to make a change. And that's all I could see in this practice. That was the potential I saw was, what, these patients had been failed by dentistry, and I wanted to level up. I wanted to step into the adult arena, and this was the perfect arena to get my feet wet, actually just get pushed off the cliff and see if I could develop wings. So the next year I worked harder than I ever had in my life. And I was going in after hours. Like, I was just so happy to be there. I was on this
Hmm.
adrenaline rush, and it was just, maybe it was the love of the new experience. Maybe it was the challenge, but I couldn't wait to go to work. I didn't want to leave work. And it was one of the funnest years of my life. And by the end of that year, I had increased production by 73%, which is pretty shocking in the dental arena, because if you get like 10% or 20% gains, that's a lot. But
Yeah.
I just put in the effort. I had no idea what I was doing business wise, but I just knew how to work really hard. And so I looked really good on paper by the end of the first year.
Well, that's, really, that's hardcore entrepreneurship, right? And great that you were, using what you had been trained to do. And obviously you've come like way far from there. We're, into big industry. But what's interesting to me is, obviously it's just part of your core. So do you believe that is because not everybody does it, or they think they can be an entrepreneur, and and the stats are really never in anyone's favor. Very few people make it and become successful, let alone move on to where you are now. So I've always thought that it's something that's born into us. But
Mhm.
but what do you think? Because there was obviously this point in which there was this liftoff, right? So I'd love to know what your insight is on that.
Well, I do think that entrepreneurs kind of are born. Like, the people that I have seen who have been able to maintain the grit, maintain their inspiration, their love of what they're doing, there's something different about them. We're a bunch of weirdos, right? And you see
We
tons of,
are.
yeah, we're built a little bit differently. And the people who try to step into the entrepreneurial arena, who think that they're just going to create balance in their life and have a ton of money,
Yeah.
they're kidding themselves. You have to be pushing it hard. Like, I've been grinding since I became an entrepreneur. And I'll tell you a bit more of the story of how that's gone along. But honestly, I think it might be something that you can learn, but I think there's this inherent spark, and it may be quiet for a long time, and then something brings it out of you. But I think it's already inside you and just needs to be awoken for the right kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it definitely does have peaks and valleys. And, I'm in my third startup company, which is actually now a scaling company. But there, those peaks and valleys can be hard to take on either end of the scale. You talked about a spark, and really with you, what I always see is this big fire burning. Like, there's always not just one thing happening, but just many. And I wonder, like, how do you maintain that, or how do you keep coming back into that and just moving forward no matter what? Because I can't imagine that it's been different for you than for all the rest of us. There are really, really tough moments
Mhm.
that where you and it's almost like you have to break down before you break through. But I just like to know what, how do you do that? Because everybody needs help in this way, right? We all need this
Mhm.
support.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the darkest periods of my life, which came shortly after that massive win of the first year. And that's my inspiration to always keep pushing forward. So a few weeks, it was about 4 weeks after the 1 year anniversary of owning the practice, I got 2 registered letters in the mail. And I hadn't got a registered letter before, so I thought this was super exciting because I thought this was like a milestone in being an owner. So I happily took my letters into my office, and as I opened the first one, I started to read it, and the room just started to spin. And I laid down on the floor, opened the second one, and the news was just as bad. And what had happened was I had gotten 2 letters from a lawyer informing me that 2 of the employees that had worked for me for 9 and 10 months, respectively, were suing me for 150 grand between the 2 of them.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, your world changes in a moment like that when you have put so much heart, so much blood, sweat, and tears into something, and suddenly this is like a sucker punch at the back of your head. And it really sent me reeling. It really shook my reality because I felt I'd been taking very good care of these people. It wasn't working out, right? So I'd done my best to try and bring them up to the day's standards because they were still practicing like it was the 1960s.
Oh.
And it just came to a point where like I was getting yelled at by them in front of patients and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't working. So unfortunately, I made that really tough call to let them go. And it was the right decision. But getting those 2 letters, I felt like my world was going to end, right? Because I'd never been through anything like that. Yeah.
Very stressful. Yeah.
So stressful. And then shortly after that, we started to have patients canceling. And when we called them and asked them what was going on, they told us they didn't have jobs and they didn't have insurance and they didn't have money because that first year, while I was so enamored with what I was doing, I wasn't watching the economy around me. And we were in the full throes of the global financial crisis.
Oh my gosh.
So kind of a double whammy from both sides.
Hitting everything all at once. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the moment where I realized like I could lose it all. I had put everything into this. I bought this practice and I had renovated the whole thing from floor to ceiling. I'd brought it to the standard that I wanted it to be. I was bringing in cool technology. And with how things had gone that first year, it made sense to invest that. But with all this stuff collapsing down on top of me, suddenly I was going, I'm going to lose my shirt. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to go bankrupt. And so that kind of stress takes you down pretty fast. And it was more the lawsuit than the economy that really shook me because I was talking to friends and they're going, something not right about this. Like you haven't really done anything wrong, but how are these people actually going after you? And your lawyer's willing to hand them a massive settlement. But I was like, okay, the settlement, we have this amount. I'm like, I'm prepared to pay this. I've got it like sorted out. And so we were waiting to the date where they had to reply. And the reply was supposed to be they were accepting it or they were countering. So at least I would have some kind of direction to take my life on. And that was actually the eve of my 30th birthday that this decision was supposed to be made. So the eve of my 30th birthday comes and I'm feeling pretty anxious about it because I don't know where things are going to go, but at least I know there'll be a path moving forward and I can't get a hold of my lawyer. So 4 p.m. I haven't heard from her, 6 p.m. still nothing. 8 p.m. I finally get a hold of her and she tells me they haven't even responded.
Oh, wow.
And I had no idea that wasn't even an option.
Yeah.
So you can imagine with all that pent up stress that I'd been shoving down, trying to be brave and not talk about it, not tell anyone what was going on, all that just volcanoed out of me. And my world started to spin out of control in the next couple of hours. And I ended up on the floor in my kitchen with my hands over my head and tears streaming down my face. And my world was just black.
Yeah.
I felt like I had no out.
Bottomed out and what's really hard is that some of these things that are so this is the first time you're dealing with something like this. It's hard to draw on, like with something like that, it's hard to draw on past experience to get you through something, and you probably just still had so much money involved and obviously so much passion involved in that clinic. So then, how did you get from there to now where you're just deflecting bullets all the time? And obviously you got through it. So what did that look like?
Yeah, well, it ended up with me standing on a stool in my basement, holding onto a rope. So I was close to taking my own life that night. Like that was just fully the plan. Yeah. And one of my patients actually called me while I had the rope in my hand. So you can imagine this is probably a hilarious scenario to witness, not dark funny, but as I'm getting ready to put this over my head, my cell phone rings, and it was a patient that I had treated from the old set of patients. And she had convinced me to place another 5 surface pin diorem. And if you're in dentistry, you don't do 5 surface pin diorem. That's just like asking for a patient to suck it out of their tooth. And she did. She had eaten some jujubes and had sucked it right out, and now she needed me. And that call changed my life. It cracked my world open, and I could see like how in 14 months I'd gone from being inspired, full of hope and sunshine, to being in this dark place where this decision I had made to buy a practice, to change my life, to level up my skills, had me wanting to step off and just end my life. So that woke me up. It really shook me to the core. And it took a long time. Like when you've gone into depression where that kind of situation happens, it's not instant. You just turn your brain around. But I worked on it really hard and started putting one foot in front of the other, and was like, I'm never going back there again. No matter what happens, I'm not going to let that happen again. So that inspired me to go and start acquiring new skills. I niched my practice into dealing with phobics. I started a referral program. So I was getting referred patients from all over the province because I had a unique skill set and I like dealing with phobics. People don't like dealing with phobic patients. They're high maintenance, and I loved it. So I ended up rebuilding out this practice with a different brand, and everything became super perfect until I ended up having pain in my hand, and it ended up actually killing my ability to practice completely. So I spent all this time and energy building in my mind perfection, and then it was all gone in a moment.
Boom.
Yeah.
These are total real life peaks and valleys for sure. So something happened to your hand, because obviously, we got from there to where you are now, which is really everywhere, doing everything. But so this thing happened, and then I guess, so you sold the practice, or what happened there?
I kept it going for a couple of years after, because everyone was like, well, you've got this investment, you should keep it going. And honestly, every time I walked in there, my heart was broken, because when the injury happened, I was 32. So it was a 30-year dream that just like evaporated. And so it was heartbreaking going in every day. And, I do listen to people's advice, but my gut instincts are pretty strong. And it just came to a point where I could see another economic crisis coming. This was in 2015 by the time I was making the decision to sell it, but I could see the economy like taking a nosedive so much faster than what had happened with the global financial crisis. And I decided it was time to peace out and just move on with my life and cut the ties with clinical dentistry. And honestly, it was the best decision I could have made, because it was heartbreaking. I think it would have been different if I had just owned a practice and not worked in it and not built it up the way that I had with me being the clinical dentist. But having created what I had created, and then having to hand that over to other people, and they didn't want to deal with the phobic patients, they were destroying the brand. It was really hard. It was a really hard pill to swallow. And so it really was time to, take the albatross from around my neck, release it, and let someone else carry on the vision of the practice.
So first of all, you just went through and told us two extraordinary, you have to be very vulnerable moments. And I'm very grateful, and I can speak on behalf of everybody that's going to watch this or come in contact with you, that hearing these stories and just, and wow, like what a gut punch, just going through and hearing these extraordinary things. It's going to be so valuable for people. And I'm very grateful and appreciative of how open and sharing and caring you are about these stories, because, the journey as an entrepreneur, as we've just said, all like this, everybody has their own versions of these moments too, right? But we don't often want to share that, because we think somehow people aren't going to want to accept us as authorities in our subject matter, or maybe we're not stable, but nobody's admitting it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very inspired by you for these reasons, that you're one of the very few people that is not only just showing us how it's done in all of your successes, but really taking us through those other pieces, which are reality in almost every day when you're starting a business and trying to run it, especially through something like this, which is a pandemic. And I love how you listen to yourself and you rely on yourself. But I do wonder, you mentioned something about someone giving you some advice. Have people given you really bad advice? And did you move forward with it at all? And what happened?
Mhm.
What does that look like for you?
Well, in each of the companies that I've built since, so I've built 3 companies now since I sold my dental practice. One was a dance company, that's Unleashed Dance Company, which I just sold this summer. There's Unleashing Dentistry's Potential, which is the dental coaching company. That was the next dentally thing that I did after the practice. And then Unleashing Influence. With all those companies, people kept saying, like, you can't stand out. You need to just like blend in and get your footing first before you stick your head above water. And I tried that. When I first started the dance company, I was working with a partner, and then we split up, and he had wanted to kind of blend in with things, and I was like, we have to do something different, otherwise we're like, this market is saturated with dance companies, and we're in the oil crisis at this point, so there's people are losing their jobs left, right, and center. So why would we want to add another dance company if it was like everything else? And so I listened to him while we were together, and then when we split up, I found my wings. I started becoming a choreographer. I did stuff that was way outside the box compared to what everyone else was doing, because that's what made me happy. And that's how we built the reputation that we did with that. Same thing with the dentistry company, right? I didn't want to do what I had been through with other coaches in my own practice, where I was spending so much money getting this very generic program that wasn't customized to my situation. I was paying $5,000 a month for a 1-hour call per month. And
Oh, wow.
like, very expensive, very reputable person. And I was able to take his information and leap from it. But I didn't want to create that experience because it created a lot of financial hardship. And, when you lose everything, like when my injury happened, I lost everything. I lost my house. I had to sell my knives and forks and plates, like everything, to try and keep my practice alive. And I lived out of my car temporarily. Like, it was brutal. And when I look back, I was like, I spent so much money on this thing that, did it make that much of a difference? Would it have been worthwhile to have that nest egg of cash that I spent to help me get through what I was going through at that moment? So, that was why I wanted to do something different with the business coaching company. But when I started marketing it, the advice came again, like, you need to blend in before you stand out. So I started using social media.
Oh, yeah.
And I was being super conservative, and I actually took my hair. I've got this curly hair, put it on this side as well, so I didn't have the shaved side, so I looked more conservative on camera. And I got so uncomfortable trying to blend in because I had something to say,
Right. And you know what? Having spent a lot of my career in the same industry, I can totally get what you're saying. But what's very interesting is I saw you do a segment on LinkedIn. It's about 3 years ago, where it was sort of a blooper or something was posted. And I said, I have to know this woman. I have to work with this woman. I had to get to know you because of how different you were. And not just dentistry, every industry needs this, and especially in the middle of a pandemic, people that you bring the sunshine. But what's so interesting is you're not scared to share, those stormy moments too, which again is why we're here, right? This is the Badass Entrepreneurs Club. And I almost think that, the rights of membership here are that, you have had a rock bottom that is significant. And it's almost impossible to build to where you are now without having had those. Absolutely. Because we know the difference. And when we get past them, it provides us an incremental evidence as we go forward that whatever's happening, we're built for it, right? I mean, you're built for everything now after this story I just heard, and everyone's going to appreciate in the same way. So, okay. You've built the 3 companies. And what I love now is that you're helping all kinds of people with influencer strategy, your social media, and it is so different. And so I think it's important that other people kind of know what you're doing now, and the significance of it, and the real difference of it, and it's anchored in what you just said, is not just sort of having a spiffy, slick, wallpaper around our videos or our posts. It's really about how you reach in and draw out the best, and expect the best of people you're working with in the same way that you're doing it yourself. So how do you get there? How do you pull that all out all the time, and make everyone else look so good in the meantime too?
Well, I always kind of consider myself to be a drama queen. Not that I'm a super dramatic person, but when there is drama, I become someone who can build an empire over it, right? So with the dance company, when the oil crisis happened, I built a dance company when there was not a dance company needed. Then I built the dental business, like the dental coaching business, again, in the same kind of time frame when things were really down in the dumps. And then I had started, because I was using social media for my dentistry company, people had started to ask me piecemeal to do a little bit of social media for them. So I was doing it on the side. And then January last year, so January 2020 came along, and I was like, we're getting enough people here that I actually need a team to help me. So I hired 2.5 full-time people. And then the pandemic went and like smacked me. And as the pandemic hit, my team was like, you know what, if you need to lay us off, if you need to do whatever, we understand. And in my head, I was like, we need to work harder. That's what we need to do. We need to work everyone under the table, because everyone is panicking and freezing right now. And if we do the same, which is what they were doing, like that advice wasn't coming from, we can conquer the world. It was like, let's hide our heads in the sand and hope for the best. So that's what happens for me when these really awful situations come my way. I just go, okay, where's the opportunity in this? It was like walking into that broken down practice. Where was the opportunity in it? And that I have discovered is one of my strengths. And then once I know what the opportunity is, I can hunker down. So now we fast forward, we're just a year past, or a month past our 1-year anniversary of having Unleashing Influence, the social media company for professionals, live and well. And now we have 16 full-time employees. So we grew that exponentially. And what happened was, with everything shutting down, not being able to see people in person, not being able to network, not being able to go and do speaking engagements where you could really speak at one event to like 5,000, 10,000 people, we started to attract a lot of these really high level experts. And, when we talk about influencer marketing, a lot of people think about, pretty people posing with pretty things and getting a pretty paycheck. Kim Kardashian.
Yeah.
That's not who we work with. We work with credible experts. So we actually can't take on anyone who isn't an expert in their field. So if you're coming fresh off the street and you're like, oh, I'm going to be an expert in love coaching, and you haven't been in love, you haven't coached anyone, we can't work with you. But if you, we just can't. You can't manufacture experience. You can't manufacture.
That's right.
So we have some amazing clients. Like we've got a brain researcher out of Toronto who is building like the Mayo Clinic of brain research. We've got associate deans of big universities. We've got amazing speakers who have been in the industry for 30 years. We've got all these amazing minds that we're just helping them to elevate their brands and make sure that the world really does know that they exist in between the moments where they're on and off the stage.
Right. So I love that story, because you were right. Everyone was paralyzed. You and I spoke, and a number of times over that period. And, lucky for both of us, we did just really lean into it. The fact that you have exponentially grown the number of people and your client base over this time is, it's just one of the stories that everybody hears, but also wants to experience themselves, right? And it comes with that's hardcore. That's hardcore. It's hardcore to say, okay, everything else is crumbling, but for some reason I'm going to just grab a torch and keep running. And so, what is that? I mean, some people say, I didn't have a choice. I think again, it comes back to this, you know, it's born into you kind of thing. But what I also notice about you, and it's why this is happening and why you even brought this idea forward and have created the Badass Entrepreneurs Club. And that is that collectively we are much stronger, right? And we need we need community, we need network. And I'm very grateful that you're carrying that torch and leading the way for us in this way. But I'm very inspired, and I want other people to know it. Did I miss anything in what we've been talking about here? And what kind of advice do you have for people that are still sitting in this and living in this situation right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to be smart with the way you're working. You know, those first 60 days of the pandemic, I did 60 broadcasts. Even if I didn't want to get on camera, I got on camera. I had friends that got on camera, and we were just having these frank conversations about what was going on. I was getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning, going to bed at 11 or midnight, and working all the way through. Mm-hmm. So as an entrepreneur, it's feast and famine, right? And when you need to move something forward, you may be feasting on hours of work, right? So you may be working way more hours than seems humanly possible or even sustainable. And honestly, I did that for 10 months. It was only like in January that I was able to slow down a little bit and get back to like an 80-hour work week. And now I'm starting to inch that back down again. But it's kind of crazy for someone to even fathom that. And as an entrepreneur, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. Otherwise, there's no way you're going to pull off those kind of hours. You have to live and breathe what you're trying to do to change the world. And it has to be beyond you, right? If you're trying to do it just to like make a whole bunch of money, you're trying to inflate your ego and just be narcissistic about your entrepreneurship, it's not going to work out very well. Same thing with social media, right? So you really, sorry, go ahead.
Well, you know, I did see you doing all that, and I thought, oh my gosh, like how is she even pulling that off? But would you say that exposure, I mean, realistically, I can't look into my network or my community of business, and I've been doing this a long time. I'm significantly older than you, but I see, you know, you're the only one really laying out this kind of plan and really helping this whole influencer kind of strategy. Was the payoff worth it? I mean, is that really core to most people's strategy? Is that exposure, is getting out in front of the camera all the time and and you know, having the bravery to do it and not worrying about saying the wrong thing. That's a whole other thing. But is that strategy core to a lot of your own success? And is it transferable? Can it work for everybody in any type of industry?
Absolutely. The thing is, our social media has really changed. Like when Facebook was in its infancy, we were sharing cute videos of cats and puppies and food and all this kind of stuff. But it has become a massive, not Facebook itself, but social media in general, which we've got all these cool platforms now, especially LinkedIn, that allows us to really showcase what we're about. And, you know, if you're going to use social media, you really have to be authentic, especially since the pandemic hit. People are raw, they're feral, and they react very gutturally to anything that's happening. So when they don't sense that you are real, that you're withholding information and not being generous, that's where people start to backpedal away from you. But if you are a purveyor of knowledge, you're trying to change the world with what you know, you're trying to build a company around your passion and really change the world. Like I think those are the entrepreneurs that is their life goal, is to somehow leave the world changed behind them. Those are the ones who are going to have that grit. They're going to be able to build a brand that can withstand the test of time. They're going to be able to reinvent themselves and pivot to new opportunities that they get inspired by. And it's not always going to be easy. I've called you crying many, many times, right? Not always, again, unicorns and rainbows. There's some dark moments that happen. There's massive moments of doubt. And sometimes like someone will say, oh, you're so amazing. And I'm like, you
like, to see me last night. Yeah.
And you don't feel it, right?
but you know what the thing is, so is that I think you get better at it, right? The recovery gets better. Again, I think what I feel like is that we build this uh, big, these big toolkits of resilience from all of those lower moments, right? So each time we claw our way out, that gives us another thing in our toolkit that makes us that much stronger. But then, what ends up happening though on the outside, people looking in, is that you make it look easy, right? And I think the point is actually really not, but nobody's talking about it, which is why we need to talk about it, right? It's a very reason why we need to talk about it. Yeah, that it, I hope that we are going to generate a lot more community through these efforts. I'm so absolutely grateful to be chosen to do this first one with you. I love you, and I love all the great stuff that's going to come from these. Yeah, did I miss anything that you wanted to cover in this first episode?
No,
Just so great to hear your story.
I think we've got it, and I really hope that this is going to inspire a new generation of entrepreneurs, those who are struggling right now or have had struggles in the past and they're afraid that they're going to go through it again. Let's keep talking about the truth of entrepreneurship. Let's not be inauthentic about the journey. Let's authentically lay it out there. Talk about our wins, talk about our massive losses, and how we recover from that, and share those skill sets that we've been developing to be able to build these kick-ass brands that will stand the test of time. And when you can be resilient, that's how you're going to become a badass entrepreneur, and that's how you become part of this club. So thank you everyone for tuning in for our first episode. Thank you, Anne, for generously taking on the interviewer role. And I look forward to seeing everyone again very soon.